the TurboPass USA podcast, bringing you conversations with industry leaders and influencers.
Welcome to the TurboPass USA podcast. But guess what? This is not just any TurboPass USA podcast. This is the first TurboPass USA podcast. We are actually doing this, gentlemen. We're here.
All right.
We're recording. We're live. Welcome.
Thanks, Marco.
How are y'all today?
Doing great.
Thank you. Excellent. Very good to have you guys. If you can't already tell, I am here with the TurboPass crew. And my name is Marco Salinas. I am the producer and the host of the TurboPass USA podcast. But I've got some really, really special folks joining me here today. Some really awesome guys that I've had the pleasure and honor of getting to know better here in recent months. And so today we're going to go ahead and have a fun, laid-back discussion about TurboPass. Since this is our first episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what we hope to accomplish with this podcast. We've got some big hopes and dreams and some big aspirations for the TurboPass USA podcast. We've got some absolutely amazing guests in the hopper lined up to have as our expert guests to pick their brain and learn a little bit more from these individuals. But again, today's episode is really about you guys. Today's episode is about getting to know you guys a little bit better, getting to know a little bit more about your backgrounds, and getting to know also what you guys are doing with TurboPass today. We're also going to talk a little bit about what the future holds. I know you guys probably have some really cool things that are in the works for the future of TurboPass. I think you guys would agree that this industry and what you guys do is very much for the taking. And you guys are kind of only just barely scratching the surface, I think, with what you're doing. So that, for me, is very exciting. I'm really excited to be able to kind of walk with you guys on part of that journey. And I'm already, myself personally, I've had a little bit of insight in that I've been able to see through Ken some of the things that have gone down with TurboPass since you guys got started, and where you guys have been able to land here just a couple of years into this thing is really impressive. It's really phenomenal. So enough of me going on about that. Let's start. Let's dive in. Let's talk a little bit. I want to start asking all of you guys some questions. The first thing that I want to do is I want to just get a little bit of a kind of a brief background on each of you, please, if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to start with you, Mike. If you wouldn't mind, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your background, where you came from, how old you were when you first got into the auto world, because my understanding is you were pretty young, and maybe you could tell a little bit about your story.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Marco. I'm Mike Jarman. I'm one of the co-founders of TurboPass with Ken, my brother here. As you alluded to, I started in the car business. I guess we grew up in it. My dad was in the finance training and F&I training business in the late 70s, early 80s, when rates were really, really high. He worked at a Toyota store in Houston, Texas, and we sometimes the only time we could spend with him was there hanging out at the dealership with people waiting to go in and sign their paperwork. He eventually ended up starting a finance company in Miami, Florida, right as I was going into college, and I took a little break from that and helped him start that company and eventually Ken came into a role there in collections and loan servicing. So we started out pretty young. I grew up throughout the rest of my career through the lender space. So I was with some early lenders that ended up being big lenders, successful. I was with the early startup team that ended up being Santander Consumer USA, and then I was with the first 7 or 8 years when Capital One first started in the market in the early to mid 2000s, and we brought some new technology and ways of doing business into the auto finance game. So we take a lot of our experience that we've had into our new role as sort of technology founders and developers of products and services that help dealers and lenders and customers.
I love it, man. That is awesome. All right, moving on right along here. Ken Jarman.
You know,
are you feeling this, my friend?
Yeah, I am here. Yeah.
All right.
Jarman.
Now let's assume that there's a few people that are out there listening, Ken, that don't know you. Fill us in on the brief elevator pitch or elevator length story of who you are.
Well, grew up in the car business. Like Mike said, dad had a finance company there in Miami. And as a teenager, started really, with my dad asking me to help him repo a car in the middle of the night, when I was in high school. And that's kind of how I got into, being interested in in what was happening with the business, and stayed there. Did not go to college. I went right into the finance space and helped my dad build that business in Miami. It was a full recourse auto finance company. It was, I think, might have been one of the first full recourse finance companies in Florida. And was there for a few years, and I eventually got into the dealer space where Mike kind of stayed in, I guess, a little bit more in the lending arena. I went to the dealer space and started, in the finance department getting deals approved and funded, and TurboPass, I think, grew out of some of the frustrations that both Mike and I saw, and the I guess the tension sometimes that the consumer goes through in that whole experience with getting approved and keeping your car beyond the first payment and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's pretty awesome. So you guys had started off in a very similar space, but then at some point in time, both of you guys had some type of exit ramp, right? And you kind of went a little bit of your own direction, still very much within the auto world, but also a little different, a little unique. And isn't it awesome that you guys were able to reconvene back at TurboPass again with all that knowledge and experience and build this company? Now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you guys have made some really, really smart and strategic decisions in terms of hiring. And I think one of those very, very intelligent decisions here that you guys made recently at the beginning of this year was bringing on Mr. Zahid. So, Zahid, if you don't mind, give us a little quick intro of your background. I think you worked for this little small company, right, before you came over here, this little tiny startup.
Yeah, no, I know. Unlike Mike and Ken, my path to TurboPass is a little bit different. I started with my career in law enforcement earlier days, and then as I left college, I ended up working for many of the financial services, financial institutions, the big boys that everyone knows, Citi, B of A, Ally, Santander, and and basically ran many of their risk and fraud functions, be it first line or second line of defense. I didn't really put my feet in the auto space until probably later in my career. So around 2010 is when I dabbled into the auto business, where I worked for Ally Financial, and I ran their consumer and commercial fraud second line of defense organization, so fraud risk management, and it was an interesting, eye-opening experience, because the world of auto changed significantly. And I remember the first day I went into the office for Ally, and I was speaking to a senior executive, and I said, how big is your fraud problem? And it was so funny. He said, we don't have fraud in auto. So that was a true eye opener for me, to say this is an interesting group of individuals who don't think there's a problem in the auto space. But as you very well know, some of the fraud that is more prominent is in the auto finance space.
Yeah,
and it stems from not only bad actors, but also stems from other, whether it's dealers or whether it's internal fraud within the financial services business. So it's interesting. I was privileged to meet Mike and Ken at my second stint at Santander, where Mike and Ken and a few others shared their vision of TurboPass. And at that very moment, when I still remember the lunch I had with Mike and a previous boss of mine, and I said, "This is it. This is what will help the industry to mitigate fraud, to be within compliance of regulations specific to income and employment and the likes of identity fraud." And I just got so enamored by the fact that this product really caters to a market that really needs it. So I joined as an advisor, and just recently I joined the organization as their Chief Product and Technology Officer for TurboPass. So I'm really excited by where the organization has come in the last 3 years. And I think what we can really do over the next 12 to 18 months to really set us apart from other providers that service the dealers and the lenders and other customers that we think would really value the TurboPass products.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Thank you, Zahid, for sharing that information. I think obviously you guys have a really cool thing going here, and the Jarman brothers saw a lot of value in your knowledge and your expertise and your background, and made that decision to chase after you, so to speak, and get you on board. And it seems to be off to a really, really great start for everyone. So thank you for sharing that. I want to just take a little bit of a step backwards, actually, and just make sure that anyone that does listen to this podcast has a crystal clear understanding of what TurboPass is, or who TurboPass is, and what TurboPass does. So I got a question for you, Mike, and you're not allowed to get this one wrong. Okay, you got to hit 100 on this one. You got to hit a home run.
Try.
Can you give me a quick overview, and if you had to explain it in a very brief explanation, what does TurboPass actually do for someone that has no clue?
Well, we deliver the truth about a customer to anyone who needs it in order to facilitate a finance transaction. So that is, some of the biggest challenges whenever you're doing any finance transaction is trying to figure out, who they are and their ability to pay. And so we have tried to endeavor to modernize that process, specifically, first of all, in the retail installment contract arena, which is what we normally associate 90% of all the auto loans that tend to happen inside car dealerships. So that being an area that we really understand the relationship between the buyer, the seller, and then this potential third party that purchases these contracts. So in the past, it's been really very paper intensive and still is a big challenge to get customers to provide proof of income, identity, ability to pay. And we've with some technology partners and a lot of work, have created a process that allows the customer to, within 60 seconds, connect some of their financial information to a trusted report that we then are able to sort of codify and allow it to be shareable in the form of a code. And that's the unique selling point that the third party lenders and purchasers, they don't want to be put in a position where they're accusing anyone of being a liar, but or fudging any of the information on the credit application. But it has been identified recently as much as a $7 to $8 billion a year problem of auto finance fraud. A lot of that comes from income and employment fraud. So we definitely saw the pain points, dealers not being able to get their money fast enough from the banks not trusting, the customer. Basically, there's not any trust in this transaction, right? Customers don't trust the dealer doesn't trust the customer, the lender doesn't trust anybody. So that's essentially what we're trying to deliver, is a tokenized way of creating a trust transaction all the way through.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Explanation. Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, you could have gone on longer, right?
Yeah, that was the short version.
So yeah, so it's still somewhat summarized. What's that, Ken? Yeah.
That's the short version.
Fair?
This is where the brothers.
Fair to say, Mike?
I gotta tease my brother. He's, that was the short version. Trust me, I promise that was the short version.
Absolutely.
Very cool, man. Very, very cool. Would it be safe to say, gentlemen, in a sense, that TurboPass is doing for income and employment verification kind of sort of what the credit bureaus do for your credit score? You're providing a trustworthy third-party verification of the facts, right? If I walk into an auto dealership, I can't just show up and say, hey, I have a such and such credit score. They're going to say, well, that's great, but you know what? We got to verify it. We got to pull this report. We need to make sure that information is accurate based on, a third-party verification of some sort. Because in my experience, a lot of times people come in thinking that they have a much higher credit score than what they actually do. And so for the auto dealer, they're thinking, we obviously need to really know where that person's score is. In some ways, are you guys providing a similar, not exact, but maybe apples and oranges, slightly different variation of that for income and employment, and I think even a few other things like insurance. Am I correct in that? Am I completely far off?
I'd say that's a good analogy. The pillars of underwriting in most businesses, right? The 3 C's of credit, or ESA. We learned how to use the ESA model, which is equity, stability, and ability. The Bureau measures stability and some history of payment in the past, right? It's very dominated by information from the past, and it tries to project, the customer's potential to pay back this new thing. But in our case, it's measuring ability, which I think is going to become and is becoming more and more important in any finance transaction, particularly as rates go up, prices of cars go up, financing of medical procedures, and underwriting of apartments, or this is something that is already very prominent from a technology standpoint in the mortgage industry. So we're modernizing things to look a little bit more like how things are done in mortgage.
Sure. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I got a question for you, Ken. What is it that you think sets TurboPass apart from competitors that are in the industry? And do you have competitors in this space?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have competitors. I think our approach is unique, and that's what separates us. We're very focused on the seller and the dealer in any retail credit transaction, and delivering value to them, and then just empowering the seller with the information they need to make their decisions too, because I think, who we would consider our competitors would probably be more focused on the lender side of things. And I think that's what separates us, is that we're more interested in really the three parties. We're interested in the seller. We want to deliver value to them. We want to deliver the value to the lender, and we want to take care of the customer. And through consumer permission data, I think is how we take care of the customer, in the sense that we're transparent about what we're doing, what information they're sharing. And, it's not the traditional, like you said, the pulling of the credit is it is in most cases, the consumer gives you permission, but in our case, it's a little bit more deliberate than that. The consumer really has to expressly consent to sharing this information, and then, their lives become easier because of it, if they're trying to buy a car or do something in a credit sale situation.
Sure. So when Zahid was giving his introduction, obviously he mentioned the fact that he's got a pretty extensive background within the fraud space. So you've been in this world for over 10 years, though, Zahid, specifically with kind of auto industry focus. 12, 13 years is pretty significant. How has the auto industry evolved, Zahid, since you came in around 2010, and specifically within that fraud space that you specialize in?
Yeah, no, it's definitely changed. It's morphed, right? And I use the analogy in the sense that, when you talk to law enforcement personnel, detectives and others that are fighting the auto fraud, task force, the way it's changed is that you no longer are, the bad actors really pulling or stealing vehicles. They are not jimmying the vehicles and scrapping for parts. They're essentially changing the way that they acquire these vehicles. And so from an auto perspective, the pen is the weapon now, right? You walk into a dealership, you forge a lot of documents, you falsify your information, and by the time that transaction is complete, you're walking away with a clean vehicle that is not targeted for being pulled over because the vehicle is now reported stolen. This vehicle has a legitimate transaction experience, but all the information to acquire that vehicle was forged or falsified between the dealer and the lender. And what makes the dynamics of auto lending very interesting is that the way it's being done is very very interesting. A detective from the Miami Auto Fraud Task Force says fraud is the new dope, and I love that phrase because it's harder to go sell drugs on the street than is to me to walk into a dealership or do a transaction online to acquire a vehicle, which then I can turn around and make a good chunk of change, right? Selling it in the black market.
Yeah.
That's changed. The other thing that's changed is how we do business. Everything is digital now. So you don't even have to be sitting in front of anyone. You're sitting behind your computer. You're sitting behind your laptop or your tablet and conducting the transaction. There's a lot of access to information that is bad information. And so, and I think that's where TurboPass really offers a trusted source, a truth of the information that lenders and dealers can take part in and feel confident that before I sign a $60,000 check over to the dealer to fund that deal, it's a legitimate transaction from an identity, from employment, income, capacity to pay. All of that is true before I give the green light to cut the check. So
Yeah.
I think that's where TurboPass really bridges the fraud, the evolving fraud, or the more fraud that we're seeing in this marketplace.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Man, that is so insightful. The new dope. I mean, who could have ever imagined that something like an auto transaction could surpass in some ways the drug world, in terms of the availability, or maybe even the ease of a quick buck, right? Because that's usually what the bad guys are going after. They're all about the path of least resistance, right? And
That's right.
so historically that was drugs, and as long as they could just evade getting caught, obviously then they're good to go. But now they're figuring out that these technology aided endeavors are more worthwhile. And what better than a automobile, right? To latch onto. So yeah, that's really huge, Zahid. I think obviously that just kind of in a very short story explains just why you are part of TurboPass, and why you were selected for this role, because this looks like very much the future of this, financing, specifically the auto world, but any type of financing. Just making sure that you guys have your finger on the pulse here of staying on top of this stuff. I mean, it's just huge. That kind of leads me to my next segue here, Mike. I want to ask you, what about the future? So we kind of alluded to that a little bit with Zahid's role. We know where the future is going in terms of the bad guys and crime and these kind of things. But what are some of the company's plans for the future? And then kind of a two-part question, Mike. Where do you see your industry evolving in the next few years?
Well, we have a couple of paths, to growth. It's one is diversification of our industry stack. And we started off in auto because we knew that space the best, and we still got a lot of room to grow from there. We have several thousand independent car dealers, but we have another 14, 15,000 franchise car dealers to go and attack. So we see that there's underwriting decisions being made every day in a space like leasing, whether that's commercial or retail apartments, etc. so we're looking at different verticals to move into. Same goes with medical transactions, or procedures that are elective type surgeries, where the doctor group might be offering financing, but they want to have a little bit better idea of their customers' ability to pay. These are just early tests that we're working on. But the other sort of growth strategy is also to add more solutions into the toolkit, which is where Zahid's helping us prioritize our ambition, right, to get better data, better information, faster, but other solutions to the dealers or the seller's problem, as Ken described. The seller is the right party, and those are things like possible verification of insurance. We've developed an income, a payroll report, essentially, that allows the customer to share their ADP information, that pushes right into one of our reports that's also trusted and can be shared with other subscribers of the platform. We're also working with some unique data providers, possibly access to 10 million unbanked customers that do have some history of payment, whether they're cashing their checks at check cashing, area. We think we could possibly help dealers that are working with that population, maybe even help them direct them to buy a car, perhaps. But we're also looking at payments and saving dealers money on some of their transactions. So instead of paying 2.5-3% for credit card processing, potentially have an easier path to have a customer do ACH transactions, and so that saves dealers, tens of thousands of dollars per month by just shifting some of the transactions from credit card to possibly an ACH transaction. So those are all in the works, and we're excited about all that coming later on this year.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Lots and lots of good information, gentlemen. This has been a great kickoff episode of the TurboPass USA podcast. As we wrap up, does anyone have any final thoughts? Anything that you guys want to share? Anything that's on your mind or on your heart? Anything you want to leave us with here? We've got many more episodes to come, and as I mentioned earlier, there's going to be some amazing guests. But if you guys have anything you guys want to kind of leave us with, if not, no problem. But now is your chance before we wrap up.
Okay, I'll say one more thing, that even though we talked a lot about TurboPass in this episode, I think we all agree that the best podcasts and the content that I've enjoyed the most out there has been when podcasts have interesting guests and bring new perspectives. So we want to make sure everybody knows that the future podcasts are going to be a lot, less about TurboPass and more about the guest and what insights they may have into the industry. So we look forward to cool guests.
Yeah, no, Mike, I totally agree. I think, when we learn from experiences and know what are some of the problems, I think that's what makes TurboPass an interesting organization, is that we look at the problems that the marketplace is experiencing and how does TurboPass solve those. And I think that's been the cool thing about working for TurboPass is a strong leadership team, a strong workforce who really is passionate about solving problems. And I think that's what, if there's anything that I would have to say or depart with, is that's what we are. We're people who like to solve problems. And we have a team that's fully dedicated, regardless of the industry, regardless of who the end customer is. We just like looking at problems and solving them.
Yeah, definitely. That was just one thing that I wanted to just mention, is that I also have had the opportunity to meet some of the other people that work for TurboPass. And so while you guys certainly represent the primary roles here, there are others that are behind the scenes, that are not on this podcast, that may never come on the podcast, but they're all playing such vital and significant roles within your organization. And again, I've had the pleasure to, an opportunity to meet most of them. So you guys have a phenomenal team here at TurboPass. You guys have a great, just a great culture and a great, energy as well that you guys bring. And I think what you're doing is really significant in the industry right now. You are very much auto dealer focused, but there are a lot of other verticals that could use your technology. And I think in time, TurboPass will get there. And but for the meantime, you guys have made a big dent in the auto world, and I think it's really improving things overall. So thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate you and all that you bring to the table, and all your insights and your history and your background. And I think the listeners are going to enjoy getting to know you guys better, as well as you mentioned, most importantly, learning from your guests. So thank you guys very much for being here today.
Thank you, Marco.
Marco,
Pleasure's all mine.
Appreciate you so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Marco.
That does it for the very first episode of TurboPass USA podcast. We'll catch you here next time.
Thank you for listening to the TurboPass USA podcast. To learn more about the resources mentioned on today's show, or to listen to past episodes, please visit TurboPassUSA.com/podcast.